have a lot to go through, so we're going to kind of be rapid firing it as we go. We have to catch up from last week's hiatus and what's happened this week. So, one of the biggest things that we did was we put up a poll, and that poll was based on the idea of horde mode, pandemic mode, priorities, X, Y, and Z to just kind of engage what people wanted most, or we needed to prioritize, and just kind of see if we were on the same page of everyone else. Now, as I mentioned previously, pandemic won out by like 80%. I think it was like 80 to 90% on the poll that I posted a couple weeks ago. So I've been working in that direction to basically get towards the resorting phase 3 into phase 2 and then phase 2 to phase 3 and then rebranding it. You'll notice that on the Steam store and on the forums and on the threads, the roadmaps and everything have been reorganized and resorted based off of the results of that poll. One of the other things that we did was we've started porting over the pandemic maps, staging them, and getting them all set up, which I'll be showing that in a bit. So, first thing I want to do is I want to show the new UI. So I'm going to open up the game. I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to go straight into it. So here we go, share screen. So one of the things that we wanted to do was there was a confusion amongst people that we're somehow we're now a third-person shooter game. When the operator was only put in to run around and move it, because that was the simplest way of doing it. Just put it in there and then go back to RTS. So ironically, that hurt us more than it helped us by not just building out the main menu as we intended, because we wanted to focus on the gameplay. So now that we're on like the ending parts of phase 1, now we can be like, okay, let's get the remaining of the UI in. Let's get the main menu and the options and everything set up. So we set up this cool little camera switcher where you can switch between different CCTV feeds across the island. And the idea is that if you're playing with people in co-op, the RTS players can spy on their friends that are running around as operator. Or if you want to jump in and play as an operator, you can go to Explore Alcatraz, and then it'll jump to the operator, and then you can go over there and explore. I'm gonna mute you. Then you figure, essentially, you can go here, and then you can go back to it, and you can jump around, and be able to just kind of like stage your scene. So the idea is that this main menu is meant for like your host and your client. They have two different versions of the menu. So if you're a client, so let's say I go to multiplayer, this is still being worked on right now, is that if I go to create server and I create a server, it'll reload, and then it'll say, okay, now I'm hosting a server. And then you figure a player list will show up here as people join. And then the idea is that as people walk around the island, you can spy on them if they're playing an operator, or if everyone doesn't want to play as operator and they just want to stay on the RTS main menu spiel, they can. And then what the host basically does is he gets this extra suite of resources that he can start a campaign session, he can start pandemic, or he can start horde. So by going in the horde, you can choose a map, and then once the host hits start game, then all the clients are put into that map. And this is the vector direction we're going into for being able to do the game. So if I go to Explore Alcatraz and I switch over to the operator, then they get the same window. So there's a synergy between both windows, between if you're playing as the Grand Eye View UI or if you're playing as the other one. And the idea is that you figure I can go horde, and I can start a session here, whether it be like the co-op test map, hit start game, and then it'll load you back in. And then all the players came over. Everyone's in your session. Everyone's playing with you in co-op. And then if I go ahead and press escape, and then return to team alone, that'll kick everyone. This is going to be rebranded to shutdown server. And then to Alcatraz with team is just going to stay the same. But if I go here, it'll shut down the server, send you back to the main menu, and then you're by yourself standalone to basically stage and figure out whatever you're going to play and whatever you're going to do. So that's one of the major elements that got in last night at the 11th hour, was basically setting up all of this and just getting everything situated for the cameras. And you can see your friends, like if for instance someone joins, I can just switch between these camera feeds and hear them shooting and running around and moving. we will very likely add more cameras, and some of the cameras we moved around. The level designers have not been given access to this tool yet. It came in at like midnight, and our level designer is like in Israel, so he picks up on Sunday, Monday. So ideally, around Sunday, Monday, when he's working on Alcatraz, he'll go around and finesse and get some better perspectives for the cameras because these are programmer setup cameras, and they're okay, but some of them could be a little bit better. And then this one needs to be moved because there's no actual camera at this position. So you figure it's one of those things that he'll work out and figure that out as he's building out Alcatraz and just designing the interior. Because you can see, like, he's been kind of going through and just kind of modeling the netting, putting in the skylights, and just generally just getting everything set up and getting like the lighting and where the light's going to come from and the reflection, doing the GL cells and getting them all modeled and situated. Because all this has to be done for the campaign anyway. So the idea was is that you figure we wanted to knock out 2 birds with 1 stone in terms of just fleshing all this out and getting it all situated. So that way, coming out of the rebuild, we're stronger than ever in terms of the amount of content and stuff we have built into the game. So now, if I pop over to, we're going to go to Horde. We're going to go to the co-op. And we'll go to Half Moon Bay. Now, we did put in this new loading screen because it was really, really bad that it would go to a black screen and people wouldn't understand what was going on and where they were. So we got that in there. And it just basically pulls from the other loading screens because in Unreal Engine, there's 2 types of loading screens. There's the one for like offline when you're like joining a server initially and when you're going back to that main menu. And then there's another loading screen type when you have a multiplayer game, and it's called seamless level transitions. And that requires a different system to be set up and programmed. So that was something we kind of snuck in there and kind of tuned up. Now, let me turn down the audio because that's really bloody loud so I can hear myself think. That's the other thing you'll notice is that we went in and we got all of this situated for the audio options, the display, the graphics, and the control. Oh, and the keybinds work for once. Yeah, I know. It only took us 5 fucking years. But if I go here and I map that to numpad 1, and then I click on this, you'll see it says numpad 1 there, and it saves and loads. That was a pain in the ass. I think that took us 24 hours to figure out, 24 to 48 hours to get the keybinds working. Because in Unreal Engine, it's not documented well, and what works in the editor does not work in a cooked build sometimes. So we had to sit there and kind of just figure this out. But we also just kind of went through and cleaned up the keybinds from what they were before. I do need to cook another patch because I did fix this, is that this is a developer build, is that sometimes Sprint shows the gamepad buttons for Steam Deck. So I will fix that. I thought I had fixed that, but maybe this I think this is an older build. Yeah, it is. The date's wrong. So you figure I gotta cook another build for that. But you figure the keybinds are working. You can change them. I'm gonna put out a patch for the gamepad stuff. The audio is working. Audio quality, audio and focus, and we also push something like this. So you figure we got rid of those ugly bars that would show up next to the things of like CPU and like GPU cost. And we ended up going in the direction of kind of like what more modern games do, like Last of Us, where it just shows like if you highlight it, we have that tooltip that shows up basically like, hey, this is the cost that these values have on your CPU and GPU. So if you're having a lower frame rate, if you're having performance issues and X, Y, and Z, then you can highlight the settings and see like, oh, global illumination is really, really extensive on this, and that. So then you would know, oh, like let's lower this down. And then that way people gain more firmer understanding of where their performance is going. And if there is a performance sink or if it's just something going wrong in the game. We put in a lot of settings in terms of basically just kind of fleshing it out. Now, one thing you will notice is that a lot of them have just text descriptions, but we also have the functionality to load in images. So that's something that Dimitri will be working on after he finishes Alcatraz, is going through and taking screenshots at different quality levels so people have a firmer understanding of basically like what does FX quality do? What does foliage quality do? So you'd see like a couple, like a photo where it showed a couple different examples. Kind of like what more modern titles do. We got rid of the idea of doing the hover tips where you'd highlight speech and then a text box would go over it, because that just looked ugly. One of the things that we do need to do going into Monday is basically setting it up so that the HUD on the back end hides and the zone cards hide, because you can see there's some overlap. For the most part, everything's hidden. Like if I press escape, like the bottom left went, but like the zone cards, hide right here, because you can see there's some overlap with the white and the blacks. So there's that, and then obviously the zone widget here needs to hide. Or we could probably leave that. I don't know. I'll talk to Derek about that. But we did put in some gameplay options and income gain sound. So that's back again from the SOC. Camera speed, camera zoom speed, semi-auto accessibility, toggle crouch, toggle sprint, inverting the axes. We got some requests over the week for the operator of being able to invert the axes. That was already planned, but they just kind of reconfirmed that we needed to kind of get that in there regardless. So that's in there again. This was the one that Winter and a couple other people had talked to us about in public playtest. Is that some people don't want to see drones? They don't want to see them in the 3D world. So we ended up going in and basically just setting up an option. So if you're a client and you don't want to see people in the 3D world, it breaks your immersion, it looks silly, whatever. You can go and you can turn that off. And this is I mean like you figure so it gives people the option. And then in display, we set up the Windows full screen. We set it up so that Windows full screen you can't change the resolution, frame rate limits, VSync, gamma configurers, back graphics. You saw all that. Auto configure was tuned to basically avoid some of the long-standing issues that we had in Legacy. Is that we used to get a feedback point that the game was blurry. The game was blurry because in some of our preset files, the 3D resolution would default to 0.90, which added a 10% blur to the world. But it lowered the cost on your CPU, your GPU, and your VRAM. So we defaulted that to 1 in the default scalability any file. But if you want to take that visual hit, you can lower it, and it will lower the strain on your CPU and GPU if you have a lower end computer. Long term, we'll look in the DLSS and FSR, but for right now, because we're still going to consider changing engine versions, we have to wait until we can implement those because we're at we're at NVIDIA's and AMD's latency in terms of how long it takes them to update those plugins. And there are still some new features that we need that are coming down the pipe for Unreal Engine features, engine functionality. So this is all in. Audio and focus is pretty simple. It just means that the audio will play when the game is minimized or not focused. So I've demonstrated that. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to resume. And then we're going to click on little Timmy here. And then let's see if I can unpause the game. Skip the countdown. We're going to move over here. Oh, you know what? I don't think I built the navigation. Yeah, the navigation wasn't built in this test map. Hold on. I'm going to have to go to my editor copy. Hold on. Let's open it. Okay, so while that opens, I will check my notes. All right, so now that we're in, we're going to load into a test map. Let's go to this one that's suitable. And we're going to spawn in an enemy. Oh, you know what? Let me turn off. Actually, that's a good excuse. I'll just show that now. So if I go to main menu Alcatraz, no, not that one. That's pandemic. Yeah. Load in. So this is basically how it will show from a client to a host architecture. Is that the client will say join server, waiting for host to start the game. And then if either player gets impatient, they can go to explore Alcatraz. And then if I go over here to the camera, then I can spy on my friend, and I can follow him around in little CCTVs. And then if that player is like, I don't care anymore, he can go back to RTS, and then it'll return. So that shows it in the proof of concept of basically what we kind of have envisioned for how the hub is supposed to operate. And then here, I'll just show it. If I go here, and then I go to co-op test map, and then I press start game, and this one transitions over, we have to figure out why the client sometimes is lagging there for a second, but then they both pop over, and then Bob's your uncle, both are in the game, and now they can play. So good to go. So now what we're going to do is we're going to pop out, and we're going to go to what I originally intended to show. So if I go to top down, and I play in the map. Actually, let me turn off multiplayer because that is going to slow me down. And if I go over here, you're going to notice that we also put in, we spawn them in. Hold on. There we go. They changed the key. So you'll notice that, we go over here. Hold on. I pressed the wrong key. Okay, that is a weird bug. I'm going to have to look into that. But basically, the range of fire indicator is in. So that shows up. And then the other thing we did was the hover tips from Legacy. So if I hover a unit, you don't have to click on them anymore. See the details. Because like you figure, and then if you zoom out, the icons show up. You can click on the icons basically for accessibility. So like that kind of stuff was put in. And then also if I click on little Timmy here, there's definitely a bug going on with the clicking registration we're going to have to look into. He got destroyed. Okay, so then there demonstrates that. Let me show the next node. Okay, there were some optimizations that were put in over the course of the week for the animations. So one thing that we noticed was that when we were benchmarking the game for coming out of phase 1, there was a lot of costs associated with the animation blueprints and some of their update rates. So we've been going through and just kind of staging up and testing like 80 circ, 80 weapons, and just kind of going through and drilling down their LODs and drilling down their overall costs on the CPU and the GPU. So that was something else that we've aimed to do over the course of the week, was just kind of ironing that out and just kind of making sure that we're maintaining a stable frame rate in terms of basically our budget and keeping everything constrained. So that was something else we kind of were working on and just kind of ironing that out. And then I'll show. So like basically we just do this. Then actually, oh, you know what? My console commands are gone. So let me do stat unit F. Yeah. So basically we just maintain the frame, the draw, the RHAT and the game, and we just make sure that they're all being kept around roughly 12 milliseconds or so. And just trying to basically figure out, is it a GPU issue? Is it a CPU issue? So we've been going through and just kind of profiling games and figuring out the performance and figuring out where we need to cut or space out calls or optimize function calls that need to be more efficient across the board. I showed this very briefly, but there was also the active operators window because we'd get people that would lose their operators. So it shows all operators in the session and their colors reflected. The ROE options came in. So you could configure weapon range indicators, always show turret UI, targeting lines, idle reload wait times, and the visual options are showing zone borders and zone status texts. So if I load into, say, the co-op test map, and I zoom out, then I can go to the visual options and turn off the borders and the text. So if you don't want to see it, it's not there. So that was something else that we kind of pushed to get in from Legacy, and now that's in on the UI pass. Weapon range indicators, always showing turret UI, or basically like if I zoom out, you see that radial that shows if they're going to enter that circle, they'll engage that target. And if you right click to highlight them while they're shooting, or if you see an enemy, it'll draw a line similar to Broken Arrow and then show like, oh, they're blocked by this object, so you can't do anything. And then let's say if I build a turret, let's do a Vulcan. And then if I build a generator, you'll see the little icon, excuse me, there. So the idea is that that's for people to really quickly find their turret icons, even if other icons are off. It's like it kind of just stands out. So like if I go over here and I turn it off, then you figure out, yeah, oh, got stuck in the thing. So then that way, like, it will only show the turret when you're zoomed out at all times. Like, see how theirs disappear? It means that that turret icon would stay all the time. So if I go here and show that one, then it just doesn't disappear. So you can always find your turrets in any kind of really quick combat engagement. And I lost. So that's in a nutshell what we've been doing on the UI. It's just kind of going through porting over the legacy stuff. Now, the stuff that can't be ported over is naturally the pandemic stuff, which is coming later down the pipe in the next week or two, depending on just how our next couple of milestones go. As it stands right now, we have to fix a couple of UI elements that you guys have seen that I just found in terms of like small little bugs here and there. So it'll at this point it'll definitely bleed into Monday to just make sure that there are no issues with this UI. I gotta do some more testing going into tonight, and then cook a build for public, put it out for a couple of days, see if anyone else runs into anything crazy for the new create game screen, for the options, for the any of that stuff, basically the UI RTS stuff. And then if everything's good and there's no complaints, then going into Monday, Tuesday, we would Monday night, unless there's nothing crazy. Going into Monday night, then the idea would be is that we would immediately move towards during the helicopters and start moving towards the direction of pandemic. Um, One thing I will say is that right now the squads are going to stay on the top left. We're waiting till Winters gets back from a little business trip, and then he's going to come back and help us design the top window here. So that'll be something that's going to kind of just stay there, or it might be moved here. The server window is being rearranged. Like this window is going to be rearranged and cleaned up a little bit going into Monday, make it a little more desirable. And it won't be visible when you're in a session, because right now it shouldn't be visible in a session. It'd only be visible on the hub. So you just keep in mind there's some small changes that we're still kind of going through and ironing out and just like getting refined going into Monday. I already talked about idle engineer button. That's back in again. The bulldozer tool is back in, so that works. And then filters is back in as well. So you figure that's the UI section. Now, let me see. Oh, right. And then the other part that got in that we didn't really talk about last week was let me go to horde HMV. This loads up, I'll be able to show you guys what I'm talking about. But basically, the idea is that on horde HMV, we put in some dialogue. Basically, when you lose a zone, and after a zone has been lost and it's been entered contagion zone, because a lot of people weren't understanding why they were taking damage or what was going on. So in a second, I will demonstrate that, and then we can move on to talking about the pandemic stuff, and then from there, we'll wrap up with the legacy, what's going on with legacy build, and then we'll go into Q&A at that point. So let me build my navigation because something odd's going on. I think a level designer was in the level. Okay, let's save that, and then we're gonna play. I'll commit that and put that out to the build machine. All right, well, while that loads, let me see. There it goes. Okay, so if I go ahead and skip the countdown, and then basically over here, you see those zone lines are working. I'm gonna go ahead and turn them off because I don't want all that visual clutter. That would be you. So what I'm gonna do is get everyone killed. So now they're gonna destroy the structure. When they destroy the structure, there's some dialogue that'll play. So the dialogue plays. The, so, so once it finishes playing, you have 60 seconds for it to clear, and it'll play another voice of dialogue. It'll basically say the zone has fallen. If you enter it, you'll take damage. And that automatically happens as it goes from zone to zone to zone. So that's the general idea there, to basically just kind of like relay to players, hey, look, you need to leave the zone. I have gotten some feedback about potentially increasing the time to like 2 minutes instead of 60 seconds. So I'm kind of conscious of that. I'm basically just talking to people and just kind of seeing how people feel. Is it too long? Is it too short? So that I'm curious of on the YouTubes or on basically the Discord. If you guys could leave some feedback there, because I haven't heard too much about it. Every once in a while, I hear a Steam thread like, but it's not enough people to warrant like, is it a problem or is it just a skill issue? So do let me know when we get the Q&A or on the YouTube's comments later on what you guys think about that, because I'm curious about increasing it to 2 minutes, because I do know that if you don't immediately build here, it can turn into a train if you're not fast enough. So that's going to be interesting, and then I'll let it play out so it plays the next dialogue line, and then we're going to move on to the next bullet point. Let's see. Okay. Okay, so then that works. It plays red, and then you're good to go. So from there, we're going to go back to the other test map. Okay, so let's see. I don't know why people said they can't hear me in the stage. Okay, can you guys hear me now? I don't know why.
Yes.
Discord's a piece of shit half the time when you use it. Anyway, moving on. Okay, so then the next thing would be is the triage. No, we're gonna go into pandemic. Yeah. Okay, so we've been setting up a couple of pandemic maps from a level designer standpoint. So let me go over to that. So we've been setting up Half Moon Bay, and then there's a pandemic master that Efren's been working on. Give that a second to open up. Yeah.
All right, can you hear me?
All right. So basically, the zones were redone in this version of it back to the original test versions that we had.
You're not streaming.
Oh, hold on. So the test version was redone, and basically what we have here in terms of like, let me spawn in. Give it a second to load up. So the idea is that basically he's been kind of going through and setting up this map for an entry-level pandemic mode, and basically just setting up the zones. I don't know why that text is screwed up, but you figure this is basically the version of the map that we're working on right now for Pandemic, and just kind of setting up the zones and setting up the buildings so that they are selectable. So we've been putting in the world building system to set up the foundation for being able to have civilian evacuation and being able to have like the little edicts that you would have on a structure. Setting up the civilian evacuation. Basically, there's like a LERP system where civilians are thrown out of a building when you set up. You guys have played the game, but basically, how they enter and exit the buildings have been set up. We've just been porting over structures. I think there's like hundreds of structures from Legacy that we've been porting. So we've just been kind of going through. Some of these buildings I don't think are all converted over to the new system. Yeah, it looks like they all are. He told me they converted all of them, but there might be some outliers that he might have missed. So I have to kind of go through and just double check everything. But you can see that like all the structures have been started being brought over and made clickable. And in horde mode, we'll have to hide that because there's no reason for you to be able to click a structure in horde mode. But that will be a little like trickle down effect that you might notice in horde mode is you can click on a structure and it'll have like it won't have any options, but it'll show you its health and its infection level. So just keep in mind that's something that we're going to patch out in the next couple of days for horde mode because there's no gameplay value there. And you figure we're just kind of going through and just sprucing up the map, getting everything set up, making sure the zone names are right, making sure the world buildings came over seamlessly, and just setting up the foundation for Pandemic. So then that way, when we get to that point, it's very, very straightforward for just being able to implement it. And I already see some things that Efren needs to go in and fix there. Yeah, so there's that in terms of that map. And this will basically be the incubator, the starting map that we push for Pandemic. Now, as it stands right now, we're aiming to kind of try and get phase 1 done in the next 24 hours of workday. It obviously bled over from Wednesday until today. There's nothing we could do about that because we wanted to make sure the UI was done, functional, and that we got the keybinds in finally. And that was a lot of that took 2 days, but it should have taken one. But it was because of poor documentation on Epic's side in terms of like how you even implement it. They leave it up to every game developer to implement it their own way, and there's not a clean modular way of doing it that is just change a keybind, save a keybind. No, there's like different ways that you have to write custom code, and it's a nightmare. So you figure we got the keybinds working finally, and that bled us over into Friday. So now the new plan going into Monday is to put the build out today, let you guys play it, see what kind of issues you guys run into, see what kind of feedback we get from any of the UI bugs or whatever. And then if it's nothing crazy going into Monday, we would wrap up the remaining UI elements and then start the helicopters. So that'll be the Little Bird, the Blackhawk, the VTOL, and the Chinook. So we'll get those in as your transport units. And then once all those are in, then the next goal would be is going to this map and setting up the zone spreading, setting up Chelsea, setting up the custom game options so you have alternate start mode. Basically just kind of baking all that in there. So it's ready to go, and you guys are able to play co-op on this map. And all the while that's going on, once Dimitri finishes the hub, and Efren's already on this map, then all focus will go to the open world map. And the open world map will be basically the main course for like the Half Moon Bay is kind of just like an incubator. It's meant to test the mechanics, get the onset of the base Pandemic mode working. So functionally, they'll be done with that. There's like I said, there's some things that Efren needs to go in and fix going into Monday, but he'll fix those Monday, and then he'll be back on this to basically porting over assets and getting everything situated from the old SDK to the new SDK, because there are some transference or some transferring issues that occurred when we were migrating over assets, and some actors got renamed or some things got reorganized to be a little more like humanly readable. And in doing so, it made it to where like some of the trees and cars didn't come over. So I'm gonna have to go in and write some helper scripts to help out Efren to bring those over and automate the process. So that's something else I have to do going into Monday, Tuesday, is to basically do that. But once this loads, I will show you what is going to become the normal open world map, like that's going to replace the legacy version. So it's loading. And then I'll have Michael talk about animation and what he's been doing for the characters. And then we'll go into the Q&A. Give us a moment to load up.
All right, I'm lagging. Is it? Am I coming through here?
Hold on, don't do your thing yet, because I gotta finish this. Okay, so when this all loads up, is basically this is what we're working on. We ported this over to the new SDK, and you can see that we're basically just kind of going through and setting up the bridges. There is still some transfer issues that some of the areas came through a little bit more empty. So Efren and I are working together to basically bring over the trees, the cars, and the other stuff. We've been bringing them over in layers and just kind of getting everything set up, figuring out what data got changed, how it got changed, and then basically just bringing it over and updating the script. So that's something I got to work with him with going on Monday. But this is the base pandemic map that we're working on, the replacement one. This island's being deleted, FYI, because it doesn't exist in real life. This island got deleted, and then Western Presidio got deleted, and it's going back more in alignment with what the real world version of San Francisco Bay Area looks like, where you have Angel, Treasure Island, and then you have San Francisco. And like the San Francisco area is basically like 6 of Treasure Islands put together. Maybe, yeah, it's like 6 of them. So you figure that's the direction we're going into. So the goal is by December is to basically have you guys so you can play this map and the Half Moon Bay. And then once we figure out the porting for this map, then the idea would be is that we'd port over Calypso faster. So that's the direction we're going into, is basically just kind of getting all of this situated and getting it all over. And it's a slow bearing process, but slowly but surely they'll bang it out. And again, this is the area that's going to become like the main gameplay space, and we just need to we're going to be assigning it into grids based off of Dimitri and Efren, and then it'll be their job to basically just take all of these prefab blockouts and convert them into real playable spaces, like actual like modeled stuff. You can see that there's also like the little civilian evacuation stuff is set up for all these. So those are the doors of getting civilians in and out of the structures. And then the bridges and all that fun stuff. So just keep in mind that's the direction that we're going into, and that's what we're porting and what we're currently getting set up. Now, let me see if I can find the. Let me pull up the Trello. Actually, Michael, do you want to talk about the infected? I don't know if he's still there.
Yeah,
Why don't
second
you talk
go.
about that real fast, and I'll bring up that picture.
Yeah, I'm driving right now. All right, so right now for the infected, what I'm working on right now is coming up with some more special infected, not like crazy mutation. I guess you could say a little bit of crazy mutations. Like right now, we have a brute that we're kind of working on, and he's going to be kind of if you guys played Dying Light, it'd be the guy that had like the giant sledgehammer. It was like just like I think he was like 8 feet tall or something like that. So that's kind of where I got inspiration from him. He's not exactly 8 feet tall. He's like 7 feet 5 inches. So he's gonna have. I'm wanting him to have an AOE attack and kind of like sweeping attacks. He's gonna do a lot of damage. There was also something I kind of found with this is more technical, the damage tables for them. So currently right now, a lot of the weapons, if you look at the descriptions for them, it tells you if they're better against standard infected, spitters, or whatnot. The standard infected weren't set up like properly, the naming convention for them, so it wasn't working for them. So this next update that Robert's putting out, you'll actually see some of those weapons actually being more effective against standard infected. So we might have to increase their health to compensate for that, but we'll see with the playtest. It might be fine. It actually might make it easier when people were having a hard time in the opening, because the guns that were doing more damage weren't doing more damage, is ultimately where that came to. But back with the infected, I'm planning on doing a few other archetypes. So like this brute, he's going to have 3 sub variants of him, and it's just going to range from like different looks and appeal. And obviously I'm thinking of some might be more of like an apex version of the brute is kind of what I'm thinking, where it's kind of more tankier, more aggressive, his attacks do more damage. There's going to be a difference in like his overall appearance, so you can tell it's more of an apex. And it's just kind of a direction I was wanting to go with, of adding more special infected to kind of, I guess, diversify the type of infected that you run out to. Because right now it's just spitters, blow up guys, and even Legacy, it was like, you know, you had like the little guys and then the worm and the lieutenants and Chelsea. So like these should add a little bit more density to the current population of the infected as well. And also encourage you to kind of, unit placement is definitely going to be another thing that I'm really just trying to kind of make the current cert kind of actually fit their roles. And so that's going to bleed into another topic where I'm going to be playing around with making the classes more useful. I feel like there's just too much crossing between all the classes right now. So kind of all you need right now is the assault and an engineer, and you're good to go. So I'm going to kind of look into that and see if I can nip that in the butt finally, because I've been an issue with Legacy, and I don't want to be an issue in the rebuild. Those are the two main purposes.
He's lagging. Basically, he's looking into making the classes have a little more purpose and gameplay that we've been talking about.
And so what?
There, you're lagging, Michael.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, like, you figure that's one of the biggest things he's looking to do is it.
I'm going through a section, so I'm actually you're robotic.
So basically, he's just kind of going to go through and make more standard infected and make more special infected that are within that cast. So like a fat guy that runs around and slower but has a high melee damage. You know, like basically just kind of looking into different archetypes, like State of Decay, like Dying Light, and just giving a little more diversity to the gameplay loop of like there's a little more like you can't always predict. It's always not going to be the standard infected 3 that does the exact same thing every time you look at them. Because his goal is now that the operators are done, is to basically move on to basically refleshing out and redoing the standard infected, making them look more aesthetically pleasing, modernizing their UI, their fucking visuals, and at the same time giving them some uniqueness to like their animations and their tool set. So it's not just the same thing every time you play the game. So that one's a little bit faster, that one's a little bit slower, that one hits harder, you know, that kind of stuff. So those are things that we're looking at. They just kind of increase the difficulty in the game and just like, you know, add more nuance to the encounters of like, you can't, it's not predictable. Because with pandemic coming in, because ultimately, regardless, high hell or high water, we're going to have a pandemic version that we can play going into the next 2 weeks or so. And it'll be the base entry line version. And that's going to mean that his goal is going to be to take the standard infected from Legacy, up convert them to newer quality standards, add some more sub variations of like the standard. This is basically a special infected / standard infected. It's like somewhere in the middle. Because it's not as crazy as the blow up guy or the spitter. It's a little more grounded in terms of like Resident Evil and State of Decay and all that. So you figure as we're working towards that vector, it's going to basically just allow him to flesh out like more. You can have these guys in only certain parts of the city. You know, you could have them like every once in a while, different spawn rates. So the things we're going to experiment with, because he was talking about making like a shit ton of standard infected that are like 10 or 20 or so, based off of just as we just kind of make them, we see just how it's reasonable, and then just not have the standard 3 males and 3 females. So then that way, when we're working on the programming, Efren and Dimitri are working on the level design. His job is to basically iron out the kinks with the standard infected, get them fleshed out, get them looking more aesthetically pleasing, and finalize them, because they've kind of fallen into decay with their visuals for the standard infected. As other characters and other standards improve, like the vehicles and like the characters, the Sook characters, theirs have not been upkept in terms of basically the visual. So that's something that we're looking to do, but also keep them highly optimized with like one material, one static mesh ID, a skeletal mesh ID, and just keeping them to where like they're visually more impressive, or you can actually like there's a lot of quality and detail to them, but they're still highly optimized. So those are things that he's doing. And this is the first version of what he's doing for that, and he'll obviously have more of the show over the coming weeks. Anything else you want to add for that, Efren? For Michael, before I move on to the next section? I know, right?
Wow. No, that's really it. I mean, honestly, one thing while I'm doing that, while you guys are playing, if you notice like any oddities and like balancing, like this is just across the board, like the grenade damage, just any gun damage, like even if it seems like something that's trivial or you might think it's not a big deal, like if you feel like it could be better, like make a thread for it, make like some posts, like just tag me. Because the biggest thing is like my impression when I play it, my play style is different from you guys. So like any feedback you guys have is greatly appreciated.
Groovy. Okay, so now we're gonna segue into the legacy. So last week we merged legacy over, and that was on the basis of basically improving the amount of people that were playing the actual like version of the game, the preferred version of the game we wanted people to play. Excuse me, and make it to where we were going to triage the build. So I've been working through a bug list of the. I've been working backwards while Derek's been working forwards. Is the idea as a compromise because it took a hell of a lot longer than we originally expected to get to the rebuild. Like I mentioned in the Steam post, as of like a month or two ago, we were supposed to be fucking done with the rebuild. But to do it right and to do it correctly, we had to take the time and research these systems and make sure what we were doing was of the caliber and the quality to maintain a stable development flow through the next couple of years. So to us, it was important that if we're going to do the rebuild, we do it correctly and we don't cut any corners. So my goal going into this last week or two was to find a meaningful compromise based off of all of the feedback we've gotten in the last 2 weeks about it being really buggy. They want to play it now, and they did buy Pandemic for the core game, and they expect the core game to work. So I've been going through and talking to people on Discord, on Steam, adding people on Steam, going through negative reviews, and just trying to chronologize the biggest tension points of the experimental, fix a good majority of them before merging them over, and then on top of that, continuing to fix and hunt down bugs related to the legacy build, the merge, and this is basically what I've been kind of going through and processing over the last week. Is just kind of cleaning up anything that I ran into and anything that people would report on Discord or Steam. Now, mind you, there's still some things that I'm processing through going into Monday, like these, and then this to-do list. My goal is to try and eradicate 90 to 80% of the bugs on the default branch before I go back to helping Derek. There's going to be some bugs left. There's going to be some things that are odd or weird because the point is a triage and not a total fix because you figure that build as well. Yeah, not very. The previous post went into it. It's not very intuitive and easy to work in that SDK, and fixing one thing is very easy to break another thing. So you figure that is my goal. Is basically I'm going through these to-dos, and I have this to go through on Monday, and then I'm going to be feeding stuff over into my to-do. This is all the stuff that I've fixed so far. These are all the things that I can't recreate reliably, and I'm still looking into them and investigating them. One thing I would say is that if you're playing the normal build, not the co-op build, the normal default branch with the Bradley and the Abrams and the VTOL, and you're running into game-breaking bugs, not visual bugs, do bring them to my attention so I can fix them and I can try and triage them out within the confines of the next. Because I'm trying to be done with this in the next couple of days. I'm trying to be done with this by Tuesday, Wednesday, so I can join Derek on the helicopter AI for help get the pandemic stuff in and help get the custom game options in. So then and hunt down bugs and crashes people have been reporting on the rebuild. Because right now Derek's on one side working forward on the rebuild, and I'm working backwards on the legacy build to try and triage it and fix high impact items. Now, I did not get the civilian evacuation on Friday, and there is one fatal crash relating to airstrikes on some video cards that I did not get to on Friday. Those are going to bleed into Monday at this point, because on Friday I was basically running fireman for the rebuild and helping out Derek and Efren and Dimitri and everyone else on the team. So I did not have a chance to basically go and because there was no work on Friday for rebuild. So for legacy, sorry for this. So keep in mind going into Monday, my goal is to first look into the civilian evacuation on Monday, see what kind of issues are going on. I have all the save files that I've collected on Steam and on Discord in a folder. I'm going to be loading those save files and trying and triaging them and then basically I'll process those out as civilian evacuation bugs, and then I'll be going through this task sheet here and then moving these over and seeing what else I can find that are use cases where the system or game breaks down. Now, Trello, let me find that. Hold on. Let me pull that over so I can. Let's see. That'd be this one. Ah, okay, here we go. So as it stands right now, these are the bugs on the to-do for a rebuild that we need to process through. That those will be worked on while we're working on Pandemic. What most likely will end up happening is that Derek will be working on helicopters in Pandemic, and I'll be working on bugs, and then switching it out on and off. Most of these over here need to be updated. This UI list is pretty much done, besides the expense log and a couple other things. So I'll be moving those over and updating them. And then you can see that like all of this is just being double checked and verified for the Derek UI, because I have to approve all these going into Monday. Like this is done. The pause menu is done. RTS UI optimization is done. This is Dimitri, so I have to move that over to him. But you figure a lot of it is basically like small little stuff that we have to do to kind of fit in between, and some of it might bleed over to basically like small quality of life stuff that we might have to do later on, because people are really gung ho for Pandemic, and you figure so we might have to basically post delay some like small UI quality of life changes, like the dots showing on the UI that might come later on, just for the sake of getting the Pandemic sooner rather than later. I'm trying to think. Yeah, that pretty much sums it up for what's going on there. Let me see if there's anything else that I can bring up for documentation. Microsoft A section. And then, okay, so what questions do you guys have for me or for Michael or any other portion of development that I can answer to the best of my ability? So I'll be looking on YouTube, and I'll be looking on Steam and Discord as well. Let's see. CSHS1 asks, will there be ships and planes added to the future, like destroyers, transport ships, transport planes, attack planes, and etc.? As it stands right now, no. The only things that we're going to have are the LCAC and the LHA6 pointed back over, and that is the utmost priority right now that I'm thinking of. I need to get what's already in there factored in and situated, and I don't want to add anything else at this point. Is there a potential for it in the future? Absolutely. But as it stands right now, my utmost priority is just finishing what's already there. Well, using experimental is more of like, what's the word I would phrase it as? It's basically like a proof of concept of like, okay, these are all the mechanics and systems that are going to be coming over to the rebuild, and that's the golden standard that we're building towards. And we're just implementing it and changing it and cleaning things up as we go. Let's see. Sea monsters and flying monsters are planned long term for the infected, like the sperm whale. They got the birds, but we'll see about adding more long term. Right now, Michael is just kind of ironing out and polishing up the standard infected and trying to get them to a point of completion. And then once we feel that they're good and we have the budget to reliably do like the sperm whale and all that, then those are things we'll look into long term. But for the time being, it's just going to be relegated to just improving the standard infected and then balancing and improving the special infected to fit their respective roles. And then will there be an option to enable civic units to use their gadgets, grenades, and etc. without needing to do it manually? No. The idea is that everything like Company Heroes is an intentionality and the action. I don't want to ever add any level of automation to the abilities. The only thing that's automated is a passive, because that's always on by default. Other than that, there's like nothing else that's going to ever be automated to that level. Let's see. Any other questions people have before we start to wrap it up? You guys are welcome to raise your hand in voice, or you can type it in text chat either on YouTube or on Discord.
There was one question more, I believe. No.
The command should have names in the controls to know which command we are changing. What does that mean? Can you explain that, CS, a little bit more? don't know. I don't understand that question. The command should have names and the controls. Know which commands we are doing. They do. Or am I misunderstanding your question? Hold on. So are we talking about these? Or are you talking about you don't like how it says command 1, command 2, command 3, command 4? The only problem though is that those aren't set commands. Like they can move, they can be like for different units, commands mean different things. For the vehicles, commands are different. For the infantry, commands are different. And for helicopters, commands are different. So like some things will be moved around or not exist at all for some types of units. So the only problem, command 1 is always slot 1 from top left. Command 2 is slot 2, and then 3, and then 4. So it goes based off of the columns from left to right, up, down, and up. So that's the only problem is that like you figure in our mind that was the simplest way of conveying like Q is always command 1, and then W is command 2, and then E is command like that. Well, actually no, they switch from R, but you know what I mean. But that's right. W A S and D is moving the camera, but R T Y U, and then it resets. Yeah. Let me look at some other RTS games and see what they do as well. I'm not gonna just draw a line in the sand. Let me do some research and I'll come back to you on Monday. Will you eventually be able to control any more units? Where was that written? Minigun turret will be to every mode. The turrets are on every game mode. There's no mission. There's no game mode specific weapons. Now, when it comes to controlling more units, the max we're going to be aiming for is 120 at this point, based off of engine limitations. Is that you figure like I don't think we can reliably go over 120, maybe 200 at most, before the engine starts to break. Because you figure we have 200 to 300 infected, and then about 100 civilians between dynamic civilian groups, and then so it's about like with the max we can probably tap on the Unreal Engine before the engine starts to explode is around probably 500 to 600 units. At that point, you have to have a NASA supercomputer. So like you figure that's the only concern that we would have. So we'd probably max it out because right now in Legacy I think it was 120 was the max. Like correct me if I'm wrong. Let me check something. Oh yeah, I'd have to opt out. I can't do that. Oh, being able to control them directly. You can. You put them in squads. You could right now. All you have to do is select a unit. So if you open up the game and you select a bunch of units in RTS and you add them to a squad and then you add your operator to that squad, then it will do what you're asking. So if I go here and I click these units and then I add them to the squad system, add them to alpha, and then if I add an operator to that squad, then I can use Q and E to give them orders.
Dark, we only see the Q and A.
So like this. So just keep in mind that you can literally press escape, go to squads, and then you can add selected to squad. So if I click on these, add the selected, and then if I add one operator and then I possess that operator, then I can press Q and E to get them orders. Q is a... Actually, I don't... Hold on. I'll just show you. I don't think they're gonna be able to live long enough. Damn it! I should have. Oh, there he is. Well, they're gonna be dead by the time he arrives, but still. Oh my lord! Yeah, that didn't work out great at all. So, yeah, fun. Okay, but the idea is that you figure. Let me go into a test map so I can show it quicker. So the idea is that if you put them into a squad, then you can basically command them. Maybe you can control them in third person like the operator. I'm not understanding that.
I believe it's like if you can give them orders. That's how I would
Are you
understand
talking about
it.
this? Oh, does he mean orders like telling them to repair stuff, or like I'm confused. I just want to make sure I'm understanding what you're saying. I think that's what he means, but I'll have to get some clarification there. Oh, he's still there. If you control them, a dead person like the operator, you see how when you take control of the operator, move around, etc. Will there be a possibility of doing the same? No. They were done that way because you figure they require a more expensive animation blueprint. And you figure like there are some characters programmed a certain way for that. Now, there's no plans for direct control mode for any unit other than the operator. Let's see. Okay, so then I'll wait for Jin to write his question, and then we'll move on from there. Is there anyone that wants to raise their hand for any questions? So Jin asked a question. My question is regarding specialist unit overhaul, spec ops, sniper, etc. I imagine we all generally understand that units conceptually, but what changes are being considered to make them stand out in their specializations? Michael, do you want to take that one? If he's there. I guess he's having audio issues, then I'll just do it. He's basically looking into weapon balancing from where it stands of like how they play in terms of like the pluses and cons of damage tables to increase damage and to
Wait.
All right. Can you hear me now? Yeah, sorry. I was like, I was pushing the push to talk, and it wouldn't work. All right, I just got home. Let's see here. Let me pull it up because I've been bashing my head on this for like a week because I wanted to like iron this out. So it is a lot. All right, so the biggest thing is kind of, I feel like all the classes kind of touch, like they pull from each other to a point where they all just kind of overlap. So I've been kind of going through and trying to figure out the best way to go about things. And I feel like there's going to be some not limitations, but I'm going to definitely limit some of the classes to exactly the weapons, the gadgets, and their playstyle, and also like their attributes. So, for instance, I feel like the assault is kind of the meta right now. The assault and the engineer, that's really all you need currently right now to kind of beat the game. And so, with that being said, I kind of feel like assault rifles, for instance, the assault should have full access to it. The heavy shouldn't have access to it. The sniper shouldn't have access to it. The medic should only have access to the lighter ARs, so not like the heavy hitters like the SCAR, etc. Kind of like going through and organizing exactly which units can use which weapons and kind of which weapons are suppressed for that unit class. My thing with the assault is I feel like the assault shouldn't have the ability to suppress. That's kind of where I'm kind of trying to figure out the best way to take away and also kind of make a use for that unit, because the assault, I just feel like at that point use a spec ops if you want to go in stealthily, you know? You follow? And then in terms of like here, exactly, of where the scientists shouldn't have any access to the assault rifles. They should be strictly like submachine gun based, kind of like how the pilot was in Legacy, of where they only had SMGs to their disposal. The radio operator shouldn't have, you know, the ARs either. It's kind of like making the classes kind of fit their mold for the playstyle for that class exactly. Those are kind of the things I'm looking at, and also with their health. The health thing is already kind of there, where their health is different for the starting values. Like I believe the heavy has the highest health in the standard circ infantry bracket, and the second would be the assault. And I think the weakest is either the engineer or the sniper. I think they might be, and I think the scientist is weaker than the sniper. Actually, I think they have 75 health to start with. But that's kind of the direction that I'm going in right now, to nip that in the butt, to kind of make the classes kind of fit their unit play style and kind of have more nuance, to like use like a heavy over an assault all the time versus like just having an engineer with a small kind of thing. It's trying to get that kind of situated so like their gadgets in the sense kind of fit their play style and their role, so it's not a one fits all kind of scenario anymore, because that's kind of the issue, is where the assault kind of fits like everything you could ever want.
The other aspect, Michael, is that when we get to doctrines, is adding in those abilities that are more centric to their roles. No.
Yes, I didn't know if we actually we haven't talked about
It's
doctrines
because it
in
was
so
moved
long.
to phase 3, remember, because of the poll. So there are some abilities
Yeah.
that there are
There-
abilities,
yeah.
weapons, and like upgrades that allows them to get better in their proficiencies, like giving the sniper a spotter, like giving the sniper a claymore, like giving the heavy like the build up and break up of like expanding their range of fire ability. So there are things that were earmarked for doctrines, but now they're delayed because of the poll to do in phase 3.
One thing also I wanted to bounce off, since we're already talking about the doctrines thing, kind of like the research center, I kind of felt like was kind of bare. There wasn't a lot to really research in a sense until we really get to the doctrine side of things. But something I was thinking about for like the units is like you could sack some money into researching certain things for certain unit types. So like I thought of having like a concept rifle, quote unquote, and like I wouldn't say each unit has like their own concept rifle in a sense, but it's kind of like just a general idea to kind of see what you guys think, and just kind of like sit on. We can bring it up next QA. Is kind of like for like the assault, they could have like a concept rifle, and that concept rifle, because how it works right now is like, obviously if you got the scar for the assault, that's going to be the stronger weapon of that bracket, but that concept rifle is going to be an in between of the lower tier weapon and the high tier weapon at a fraction of the cost. But obviously there's pros and cons to each weapon, and so that would be something that you could like spec into, of where it could have like kind of like we kind of talked about status effect ammunition. So like you have like shock bullets or like incendiary bullets and stuff like that, where this gun would kind of incorporate that to kind of I don't know, it's just an idea to kind of really push out like that play style. If you really want to like you know, modernize like the spec ops, make them a little bit more deadlier, you could use like the concept rifle for them, and they do like shock rounds, so they constantly are stunning the enemy. That was just something I was thinking of for like research points, or like additional like stuff that you could like research for the units to kind of elaborate and kind of make your own battalion in a sense, like the shock troopers. No problem. Also, Robert, I'm kind of offended you don't have my name up on the thing.
Yeah, you're like a last minute attendee, so I had to just like spite you. But
Last minute is crazy.
But okay. One thing I would say is that there's a lot of interesting ideas that me and Michael have been spinning around back and forth to kind of accommodate and to improve the like class synergy of like this class is good for this class is good for that. And
We've gone back and forth about that a lot, actually. It's been a
yeah,
while. It's trust me, guys, it's something that we think about all the time. It's just kind of going about it the correct way. And like at the same time, I don't want to keep taking away, but I kind of want to get this ironed out to where it won't be, like, oh, you just need an assault. The assault will take care of
That's
everything,
right.
bro.
One thing I do want to add is something that I was in public Discord last night, and we were talking about the game, and we were basically just playing games or whatever and having a good time. And one thing that's always bugged me about the game that I brought up to them, and I want to just kind of bring it up here for YouTube and just for posts, because I know most of our views on YouTube is posts. And you figure a big point of contention for me was pandemic and the carrier difficulty, because you figure, as many of you know, going into the re-implementation, we were trying to figure out, it's really hard to lose in the game. I'm gonna be frank. Like, you figure the lose achievement is almost impossible to get because the carrier is the lose condition. So one thing that I'm mulling over and debating, and we were talking about this last night, and there was a lot of people in the room giving us some really good suggestions and some nuance there, what they thought, is making it to where the CDC tent and the carrier are a lose condition. Making it to where you can only have one CDC tent, and once you place it in pandemic, you have to pay a cost to move it, and there's a logistic time to move it. So that way, it makes it to where you can actually lose in the game. Because as it stands right now, once we add in the custom game options again, so you can turn off the birds, turn off the Leviathan, you effectively can't lose unless you intentionally evacuate infected civilians, which makes the game impossible to lose. You only have soft losses at that point, which is garbage game design. So that's been an issue that's kind of plagued the game in the legacy versions. And I feel like the compromise that was brought up and discussed last night in the public channels, and what I'm putting into the public sphere right now, is the best meaningful resolution. Is, again, I will share it on my screen just to kind of make sure everyone's on the same page. Is that you have a structure in our game called the CDC tent, which is this little guy right here. And the idea is that if you lose this structure, you're out of the game, or you lose the carrier. Either or is a loss condition. And the idea is that if you want to move the structure, you can pack it up, and there's like a 1 to 2 minute period of time until a sky crane comes, picks it up, and moves it. It can be attacked on transit, and it can be attacked obviously when it lands. And then once you land it, there's a cooldown time of say a minute or 2, 3 minutes till you can move it again, so you don't just leapfrog constantly and exploit the system. Because my biggest concern ultimately when it comes down to the game is the feedback that I regularly get on pandemic, that the game is too goddamn easy, and that literally all you need to do is just blow up a couple of bridges and go and hide. And with pandemic this time around, I'm trying to alleviate and improve some long-standing concerns and issues when it comes to not only civilian evacuation, but also the gameplay loop as a whole, and make it harder, make it a little more tension-riddled. Because right now there is no tension. You go and you hide your carrier in a corner of the map, and then GG, you're done. So you figure that's something that I'm looking into. I'm very curious what people's opinions are on that. Um, and you figure now, if you guys have anything you want to add onto the Discord chat, feel free to write that. If you have anything you want to add on YouTube, feel free to write it there. But that is currently what I am, going for when we implement pandemic, is to basically make this structure a your loss condition, and then implement that moving system. So I see some people are typing, so I'll wait for that. And then what I also want to do is I want to show. Let me see if I can bring that up. Let me see. Time to write that stuff. here we are. So as it stands right now, this is a mock-up, so take it with what you will as a grain of salt. But we're looking into basically, like this is basically a little mock-up of like basically custom game options. Now, obviously, this didn't stay. Like the one that I showed you currently implemented is the final map selection, game settings, and all that. But basically, we're going to be taking the concept of how these custom game options work and drawing and basically drilling into this and expanding it, going into the pandemic re-implementation and the rebuild. So you'll see a lot more tabs and a lot more configurations, and like being able to turn off the Leviathans and the Juggernauts and the Spitters and the blow-up guys. And then being able to change their health, their movement speed, what days they come in, and just generally what kind of like density of population, like how fast you want it to spread. So you'll get an option to change these multipliers in the new version. And then we'll just like there's gonna be a period of time where we'll just take community suggestions for custom game options as well. So if we're missing something in the first implementation in the next couple of weeks, feel free to bring it to our attention and we'll consider it. But yeah, so you figure that's my concern, and that's what I want to. That's what I want to alleviate this time around is to make the game actually hard again, because right now it's too goddamn easy with the carrier. Let's see what people have wrote. So CSH1S asks, personally, I never hide my carrier. I ask to use it to support firepower. And then Bob the Builder says the same. But again, the issue is that it's really hard to get it killed. What are you going to say, Michael?
I mean, my thing was I was thinking, I'm an old RTS player, so I'm talking like Commander Conquer Generals type of thing. And I was thinking like let's say we have the carrier, right? You make your main straight circ structure. You only can have one of those, and that's like your central, main base, like not main base, but your main building, like that has to be protected. And once that's destroyed, that would be the lose condition. The carrier would just really be the support and kind of your starting section to get you in there. And that structure is literally like the main honcho defend it, kind of like the sock in horde mode in a sense, where the structure is like without that structure, you basically can't do anything.
Yeah.
Yes. My fault. Yeah. So that in my head, that was something I was thinking about of where you can kind of, you could still use the carrier as support 100%, but that building is really the main kahuna, like the objective. Like if they destroy it, that's, game over.
Yeah. And that's what I think is the most meaningful direction to go in is the carrier is no longer the lost condition, and that it is tied to the CDC tent, the circ tent, and that we go in the more atypical RTS because Winters never really worked. It pissed people off. It made them to where they didn't want to use her, and then she just sat at base all day and she took up one pop. So that was a slap in the face. And then you figure, then we pivoted to the LHA6, which made sense on paper. But then the moment we gave people the ability to turn them off the Leviathan and the birds, there was no longer a viable compromise. Because you figure some people didn't want the Leviathan and the birds. And like I explained to people on the public Discord last night, some people were the idea of taking away custom game options. And I'm like, no, you can't do that.
You really can't do that. That would piss off. That pissed me off.
Reality of what people's expectations of cepheusprotocol is, where it's your pandemic contagion simulator. It's do you want Dawn of the Dead? Do you want Left 4 Dead? Do you want 28 weeks later? So the idea is that you get to customize and get to the whims of how you want the game to play, and that's the direction I want to go into. Where it's like it reinforces the narrative of like pandemic is not canon. Pandemic is whatever you're playing, whatever scenario or role play or whatever however the fuck you want to have fun that day is the general premise of the game. So it's one of those things where it's like, okay, we need to take that into consideration and build around it and make sure that what we're planning is fluid enough to facilitate all the different types of playstyles. Because at the end of the day, the common denominator is always going to be the standard infected. And they can always get everywhere as it stands. So we have to plan around that in terms of like, okay, what kind of structure and what kind of entity can we place in the level that anyone can get anywhere, and that's the structures you can build. So I think this is the most meaningful compromise to be had to basically like move towards. So let me move that back over to the Q&A, and then we will see what other questions are, and then we'll start to wrap up. So Jen asked a question. Fuck, he commented. He read it out for some reason. I understand the game being overly easy, more experienced players, but
You said you covered it. That's why he did.
oh, I'm just gonna read it anyway. But there is a question of difficulty versus the player expression. My group largely RPs the game in different ways, some being civilian focused, some being umbrella corps types. Some playing the game straight and so on. I imagine there's a threshold of difficulty where the game loses some of that player expression and approach railroading gameplay styles. Not that I'm worried you guys are crossing that line. Your development has been wonderful to follow, but it's something I think worth keeping in mind. Literally just covering everything I was about to say, huh? Oh, okay, yeah. So, yeah, I'm very conscious of what you're saying, and I'm always taking that into consideration of, like, making sure that, like, you're not appeasing, like, you know, obviously, like, the casuals a little too much to where the game has no difficulty, but I want, like, I was talking to Delta last night, and he was saying, like, you know, like have this, have that. And I'm like, look, at the end of the day, if you're not fearful of your base, if you're not actually like having, like, if you don't have any skin in the game, there's no anxiety. There's no like, oh my God, this could pop up and I'd lose everything in a moment. And everything I've done up to this moment is lost. The game's too easy. It's too forgiving. There needs to be consequences to your actions in terms of how you're playing, in terms of like if you don't defend your locations, if you don't double down, and like if you take shortcuts, if you take risk, if you gamble, and those can pay off sometimes, but sometimes they won't. And as it stands right now, if it being the carrier, you could be as reckless as you'd like because you have literally a mobile base that just literally is a loss condition that once you turn off Leviathan, you can't lose anymore. So you figure that's one of the things that we're looking at, and I'm of the thought process of like pandemic needs to be like unless you turn the custom game options on and you like tweak it and everything, director's cut at the very least should be sweaty. It should be basically very like anxiety riddled. You should have to plan things out. There should be consequences to your actions. There should be like if you don't defend your proper base where your CDC tent is, and then a Leviathan shows up, or a hidden infected party sneaks in and they scuttle your base, you lose. You're done because you didn't plan it, you didn't scout it, and you didn't prepare for it. Of like having enough guard towers, having layers of defenses, of walls, and like checkpoints and stuff like that. So that way it incentivizes people to slow down and think about their defenses, think about their building. And in the same regard, when you add in the level of players that you can have in co-op, which is like an upward of like 16, you can have roles where it's like you have 3 or 4 people that their only job is to basically just fortify the main area and make sure you don't lose. And then you could have a couple other players that are doing offensive operations and making like and meeting like civilian groups and making alliances. And then you could have a couple people with an operator, a couple of operators and a couple of RTS players working together to basically hunt down Chelsea. So that's the beauty of it, is what we're building towards, where it's like, and then you take in that sweet, that perfect package of custom game options, is that they can play 28 weeks later or Dawn of the Dead or whatever they want to play, and they can Left 4 Dead, and they can make it facilitate however they want the game to play. So that's what I'm thinking of. I'm thinking of the big picture in terms of like that umbrella and that gameplay loop that I've envisioned in my head of how the game needs to play and how to get it there, but also make it a challenge in terms of the combat and the decisions that you have to make along the way. So let's see. Is there anything else for questions that have popped up? So CS asks, one thing I would really like would be maybe a mode where the world is already lost and there's survivor factions that are fighting each other, surviving against these zombies, monsters, and you come in to cleanse the land and rebuild. So you're saying more of like, there's a game for this. Not like Frostpunk, but more like Like the project.
Thinking of Just Cause,
What are you talking about?
where you come in and you're like liberating the island,
Oh.
and there's like the zones you're kind of liberating, quote unquote, and when you liberate it, it flashes and rebuilds, powers back on,
So like
etc.
basically you're reclaim. I'll put that down as a wish list item.
Kind of like everything's like completely under
Sure.
basically. And you come in and people start moving
I'll
back
write
in.
that down as a wish list item. You figure like there's a lot of good ideas that I've heard that are just things we can't do right now. But there's no one saying we can't do them in the future.
Listen, I was wanting to have a preset, kind of like we have director's cut and legacy, where you can select like a difficulty. I was wanting a Michael difficulty where it's like realism, you
What
know,
does that mean?
where like for instance, I was wanting because we have the data assets. I was wanting to have data assets based off the game mode setting, so that way you could have like the ammo amounts be like lower, like a lot more realistic. The damages will be a lot more realistic.
Oh, like a realism mod.
So it'd be a lot more kind of like a realism overhaul of everything. Because I know there's some people that really like the RP factor of it, and if you kind of made it realistic, it would make unit placement and hordes like you really utilizing like going out with smaller teams versus an all-out war, because it has to be manageable. Because I promise you, the spitters being realistic, they would be that would
But
be
you're also
devastating.
talking about in regards to like max ammo capacities. You're talking about
Yeah, like
how
the
much it costs to buy
reserves, like the
weapons,
resupply rates.
ammo resupply rates.
Yeah, the prices, like it's a lot more like give and give and take.
So it'd basically be like
is
a
what I'm
developer
thinking
ran
in a sense.
hardcore mode.
Basically, yeah.
Oh, now I'm curious. Okay, well, you throw your ideas into the realm for that, for Michael's idea, like on YouTube and on Discord. When you guys get a chance, just tell me what you guys think of that. I'm not against it. I'm just curious how people will feel about that. I'd personally play it because I love those modes, but I'm kind of curious what do people think as well, because that's something we could do as an auxiliary item later down the line. Because the system would easily facilitate that, of loading alternate damage types.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's with how we've done, yeah. Like even that, like you literally just have it like the T map for the data asset, and you could just tell the data asset to find a different data table and option.
And it does its like damage. We would simply just do a fetch of which damage type to call. So instead of mapping a damage type in where we map it individually, there'd be a data asset, and that data asset would be mapped to a like a setting in the game state or the game instance, and then that way we could be like, oh, you're in this mod or you're in this mode, so use this damage tables, use these, and it's
exactly. And then in that mode as well, I would slower like the sprint speed for the units. Like I would make it. We might actually have to do this anyway. Well, I guess like in the long haul of like making it where certain circ units are slower than others. Well, that too, but like also like how all the circ units run at the same speed. So like we have to add some givens to the formation system because it's really aggressive to kind of let some people kind of trail behind a little bit.
Some people have heavier equipment,
and that way it could facilitate it.
Because the minigun
exactly is to kind of
assault in the Spec Ops.
Exactly. And so I kind of wanted to mess around with that a little bit. But another thing is like for like call-ins, like airstrikes and stuff like that, you would have to wait. Like these would have to be like planned and coordinated where you're trying to keep in that position to wait for that airstrike to come in. It's not going to be like you click here and 5 seconds later, your A10 comes through in Rex's house. Like it's going to be like 3 minutes. Not like 3 minutes. We got to be like a little, got to give a little bit of leeway there. So maybe like yeah, we'll do like 30 seconds or something like that, where you really have to coordinate these strikes and these attacks, and that's kind of like my thought process. When I'm thinking
about games like Arma, where like you can figure you could do a couple of bombing runs, then you immediately have to go back to refuel or rearm, and those could be anywhere between minutes. They could be a good period of time because whenever I'd play Arma with my friends,
yeah, like the cooldown for it could be twice as long, stuff like that. Of where. That's just an example of like where my mind's going with that type of difficulty setting. Because yes, you could do it in well, to an extent, like in the custom settings. I don't know how in depth because that's a lot to like to show for like the weapon damages. I feel like that might be a little.
So this is
I guess
kind
we
of
could.
winter of the opinion of is that you figure we want to give as much customization to the game as possible with the second push to make it where people can make the game their own. And if they don't necessarily like our decisions in terms of like classes when they appear, health, speed, damage, they can change that. Now, when it comes to the weapons for the Cirque, there really wasn't a section or like mutilators for those. I could talk to Derek about it and see if it's something that we can do, but that might have to come in a second pass because you figure,
Yeah, I was gonna say that might be a lot more complicated, especially if we have because you would have to be able to modify the damage fallouts at that point too, and that just
well, you
might,
have to.
you know what I mean? Like there's so
Technically,
much to the weapons behind the
we could
scenes.
just write a system where they can click on a weapon, and then it would show all the details of that weapon, and then they could choose to use the stock values of the damage curve graph, or we could make them a visual digital curve graph that they can click on and move the points around to rebalance your weapons. So if they don't agree with like the M4 damage fall off at like 10 meters, they could click on the weapon, a curve graph would appear, and then they could.
Oh,
And then,
I'm
oh, Lord,
also.
what have I done?
I didn't mean.
What?
No, I just remembered the damage table thing that I ran into yesterday. I'm really curious how I really feel like I might have to up their health because it might be I'm not sure. What's the general consensus right now of the rebuild? Is it hard?
It's sweaty. Everyone that I've talked to
Okay,
on Steam,
okay, okay.
everyone that doesn't play with us on co-op, where they see all the metas playing with fucking Bob and Hawkins and Quively and Ford, it's hard as fuck. They generally get destroyed. The first 2 or 3 games is the consensus.
I would definitely like to see how this go around. Are we doing a play session after or no?
Play a co-op game after this? Anyone here want to play with us? I don't know if Bob or Jen or Rifriel Ford, do you guys feel like playing? Okay, so we'll play a game. We'll stream it then. I'll just stream it on the company one. I'm not even gonna bother switching over to my personal Twitch then. We'll just call it Cirque HQ After Hours, like Linux Tactics does his for After Hours. But okay, so we'll segue into a co-op session. Let me cook a build because I need to fix something that I ran into in the live stream.
I mean, that brute is in there. You would just have to add him to the spawning queue. His hammer isn't in there, but technically, he's in there and he does attack.
I mean, you could give him a sledgehammer. We have a sledgehammer in the repo, so you could give him that.
We don't have a sledgehammer. We have. Bro. He's like 7'5", bro. That hammer is like he could pinch that with his index finger and thumb.
Let me.
I mean, like, I guess I think I might have to convert his skeleton over because right now he's on his own, but it shares the same naming conventions. It just doesn't have the sockets for the hand for the weapon spawning. Because I figured I was going to leave that unique. Because honestly, because of how okay, this is like back end shit. Basically, Robert, they have the same naming convention, so it might be a lot easier to have less sockets instead of taking all the sockets. It'd probably be cheaper. So I was just gonna try to keep it cheap.
Oh.
So it uses the same naming conventions. We just have to. That skeleton would only have the sockets that specific character needs.
Okay, we'll have to let's reconvene on that on Monday because you figure it won't take us that long to get a sledgehammer in and to basically set him up so you're good to go. Because I have a limited time for Mondays. I got to do that. I got to merge over the assets for Ephraim, and then I got to get back to the legacy civilian evacuation bugs. And then there's a couple of bugs I need to triage that somebody was talking about in general comms on Discord today.
Well, that's what I was gonna say. Did you want to add him to the spawning queue because he does come in?
All you gotta do is just duplicate the standard infected blueprint, and then all you.
I already did. That's already committed.
The horde state and add them to a wave. You literally just go into the HMB or the Half Moon Bay game state. You look for the array. You add a new index, and then you copy it onto every wave, and then you can set how many spawn per wave. So you could just do that without any human intervention, programming intervention at all.
Have you loaded all the maps
I
though?
don't know what that means.
I haven't opened any of the
You don't have
masters
to
for
open
those
the masters.
maps.
You gotta open the game state blueprints.
Oh, okay. So before in Legacy, I had to
No,
load the whole map.
that
to
was
get to that.
deprecated because it was too unintuitive. So
Okay, hold on. I'll do this real quick.
So you figure I'm going to cook a build and release it in a second. We're gonna say
So-
Bobby, yeah.
Wait.
CS had one more question about having an option to change of pops/units
Oh,
when a map is growing.
where is that?
Like
Let me look.
you got tagged, and it's basically there's an option already in the custom settings to max out the unit size to 200.
Yes, that is the thing. You can't change it out to 200. You're right. I'm sorry.
But I do agree if a larger map is there, I would love to see a higher population
You don't
cap
think a 200
for
is enough? It would lower some of the
organization.
population costs themselves.
Yes.
I'll have to get back to you on that one. We got to see how it plays and how the engine holds up, because there are some things that like literally. I explained this previously, but if we increase the amount of units, we have to dumb them down. That's what most games do, like Total War or whatever. And even then, they cripple under the amount of units. Has you ever noticed that when you have a max army, 2 or 3 max armies running, your frame rate goes in the shitter? But the problem is that game doesn't require the same amount of like per second executions of like the abilities. It's a lot more hands off. You just watch your units fight to a certain point. So that's my only concern with Cepheus, is that if you go too high for the unit count, we have to increase the minimum spec for the processor. So there's that concern, because we can only hyper optimize their movement and their AI to a point where it's just not technically feasible anymore. Where it's like once you get above 500 to 600 units on the map for Unreal Engine, any engine, it blows up with the amount of complexity the AI units are using. So that's what I'm always kind of been torn between, is that if I increase the pop, there's something I have to take away somewhere else. Whether it be the reliability, like automating, making their animation quality lower. So that's the trade-off. So like you figure that's going to be an experiment on its own in terms of how we tackle that going into San Francisco North's edition, because you figure that is a concern I have, and we're going to have to test it and see how it feels, and then see what we can do, because there are potentially some other things that we can do for optimizing the movement component. Because right now, the number one cost that is hampering our ability to go crazy on the unit counts is replication costs for synchronizing all the units, and then the what do you call that? The movement component is calculating their movements in the world and then synchronizing them with all the clients. That was what horde mode was for. That horde mode showed us that reliably we could go around 300 to 500, and then at that point it kind of goes off the rails. So you figure that was another reason why we did horde mode first, so we could figure that out and stress test the engine. So it's one of those things where we're gonna have to just kind of regroup on that one in pandemic. I mean, there might just have to be a limitation of 120 to 200, and there's nothing we can do about it, honestly, at the end of the day, because you figure Space Marines probably around 50 to 100 at most. World War Z is around 50 to 100. If you ever notice in World War Z, only about 50 to 100 guys are allowed to enter the arena at any given time, and all the other units that are gameplay entities are 2D animated sprites that don't have any gameplay value besides just dying and waiting until they can enter the gameplay area. So as far as I know, no game developer has figured out how to get higher density of units. The only one's Days Gone. They managed 300 at most before Unreal Engine 4 explodes. No, it was 300. Yeah, it was 300 for Days Gone. That's the game that's managed that high. So it's one of those things where you figure like those are the realities of things we have to keep in mind when it comes to like minimum spec, network replication, and just CPU. But again, we're conscious of that, and those are things that we're looking into going into pandemic and seeing what else we can push. Because in Legacy, there was around 200 to 300 infected at any given time. There was about 200 attacking units and 100 that were delegated to the defense. And then the system would skew them back and forth based off of need and demand. But those are things that we'll look into with the rebuild and see if we can iron them out and improve their AI with this second coming. And see if we can make it more apparent where the population's going. Because one thing that I know of that would be an issue in Legacy is that Chelsea would fixate so much on the dynamic civilian groups that she would not focus on you, and it would make it as if that nothing would, like, she would never really attack you, so you could roll over her defenses if she was too fixated on the dynamic civilian groups. So that's something else that we're going to have to tweak going into the rebuild, is have it to where she barely fixates on the dynamic civilian group. She maybe focuses like 5% of her army on them, because you figure she would focus like 80, 90%. And then you'd be able to roll her while she was focusing on people that have no consequence to her, that had barely any defenses, but she was like going ballistic, trying to clear the map at all costs. So she would like allocate 90% of her population to just killing every dynamic civilian group on the map. And then you'd be left with like the scraps of whatever 5 to 10% she could wrangle together to fight you. Okay, no, I dig it. We're gonna definitely be playing co-op. I'm cooking a build right now, so we can basically get it out into the nether. I just gotta check a couple of quick bugs, and then we're going to put it out, because I gotta just make sure my navigation build went through before I put it public on the Circ HQ branch. Obviously, there won't be any patch notes because we're gonna be releasing the patch and then immediately playing it with y'all on stream. So the more the merrier. The more I can play, the better. I'll put out a call in general comms on Discord and in the playtester tag to try and get more people in. It'd be amazing if we can try and get 10 people into the game. I then delegate up roles and just see how it goes.